Hi, welcome back to our annual. What are we? Is this our annual scary movie thing? Is that what we're doing?
Has it?
I think so.
Has it been? It's been more than a year since we did Carrie, right? It's been a year
It's been a
since
minute.
Nicole and I watched all the Scream movies for this.
You watched
did
all
quite
the
a
Scream
marathon.
movies for this one?
We watched all the Scream
Scream
movies together. Like
Jesus
together,
Christ.
together. Yeah.
Well, okay.
And
All
a
right, well,
documentary and some interviews.
I don't know that I would call that like a documentary. Like it was not a documentary.
It was an effort at a documentary.
Yeah, it was a splicing together of thoughts that they built as a documentary.
Well, we did the Carrie podcast. I was trying to think, did we do the Carrie podcast when I was still in Florida? Or had we done that after I moved out here to
It was the first time you and I had
Colorado.
actually spoken. We had
For reals?
only, yeah.
Now I just call you when I'm having a midlife crisis, which is not something you signed up
I'm
for.
fairly good at talking
So-
you down from those.
Sometimes you're like, Jason, just don't ever date ever again. Please God. And definitely not Cubans. Don't ever do that. So I won't anymore. All right. We'll get into
No
why we get into this in a
comment.
second. What you know all the juicy bits. Also, mistakes I've made in the past. Not that I would. Nicole's like, I'm assuming that if I've told you, Rachel, that Nicole already knows. So,
He knows.
It is known.
there's a circle of trust. There's a trust tree going on. All right.
As we're speaking
before we-
on camera, being recorded.
Yeah, and we're going to
Just edit all
broadcast this
those
out
bits
to the
out.
internet. Whatever. Look, one
Just
of the
tend
things
to
that
hold
I've
them.
Nicole knows that what Jason knows, Rachel knows, and now Nicole knows that this is our
right.
circle of trust.
It is, and I have I have a brand new text chat that's opened up in the last 3-4 months. The amazing women who did the Raiders of the Lost podcast, Raiders of the Lost Ark podcast with me, and I.
I'm going to say that was a great name.
I was like, that is an awesome name. If that's not taken,
It's a great. I'm taking
Raiders of the Lost podcast.
Holy shit!
I love
that's
it.
good, right?
That is good.
That is way better than the name I picked up.
That
for
would
the
be a
second
great
podcast we're
archaeology
opening.
podcast, Raiders of the Lost podcast.
Oh my God, I'm going to tell them tonight. I was just texting them actually. So, but one of the things was like when we opened up this opened up this text chat was, so it's me and Kate Shepard and Julia Trochet and Leah Packard Grams, who were all three amazing people. And I was friends with Kate, and then I was becoming friends with Julia and Leah. And there's this part when you're like, how much crazy do I let them in on? When you're becoming friends with someone, do you know what I mean? You're like, okay, listen, I have some shit that I'm working through. Are you ready?
We had the historian moment of that. Because Nicole and I we hadn't known each other that long, and we happened to go to SAWH together.
Okay,
And so
I don't
we
even
were
know what that
in-
means.
Southern
Society-
American Historians.
Okay, you can't
It's like
just
a
throw
subset
acronyms.
of the Southern.
It's just one of
So
the
they
other
have
acronyms. Fill in your favorite acronym for that. Southern of something, something.
Okay, fine. All right, go on.
Southern women's historians, basically. And so
Right.
they have a triennial conference. They broke out of the Southern back when women weren't very welcome at the Southern. And so we went to their triennial conference, and we had like this extra half day to do whatever we wanted, and we were flying out the next day. And so like I ran to the restroom and I was looking at different things we could do, and she was looking at different things we could do, and I was like, is it too weird to say I want to go to a cemetery to this person that maybe
No,
knows me a
right?
little bit? But I walked outside with the historical cemetery on my phone, and Nicole had it on hers too, and I was like, besties.
No,
We
right.
were,
There's this
in
moment.
our defense, not that we need one, but I was thinking like, okay, Henry Clay is here somewhere.
A very dead
What's
Henry
left,
Clay, but yeah.
what's left of him
Wait,
is here
you were in Louisville?
somewhere.
Where were you?
Yeah, we were in
That's what
Louisville.
the SAWH was.
And so we were like, I was like, we could go look for Henry Clay.
Yeah, I would
And
totally
look,
go
we
with
did.
that.
And look, we
You found
did. It took Jason. This man is buried under this giant monument of a
Obelisk.
something, right?
Right.
Rachel's sense of direction
I have
leaves
none.
much to be desired.
We had
and
lots of extra cardio on this trip before Nicole learned that I should not be in charge of the direction.
ever. And then I let her, I think it was after that, we went to San Antonio, and I was like, the river walk is a circle. How lost could we get? And so
we walked to the wrong hotel.
Yeah, she sent us to the wrong hotel, which was like a mile away from our hotel. And I was in like 3-inch heels, which are still in my closet, by the way. Yeah.
Don't wear that.
Because I was like, well, we're not going that far away. We were just going to dinner. I was like, I don't need to change shoes. Not a big deal.
Yes,
in our defense, while trying to find Henry Clay, the Uber driver decided to drop us in the middle of the cemetery instead of at the front for some reason. And we just went with it because we thought he knew better. But all of the signage and like explaining where to go is all at the front. So we were just randomly wandering this cemetery and excitingly discovering all of the 1918 bodies before we stumbled upon Clay.
This is a lot more of Kentucky than I expected to have on the show tonight. And everyone knows that I'm from the Commonwealth. We're going to get into this movie, Scream, tonight. And I guess we're getting into all 19 Scream films at this point in time, since you watched them all. I didn't know that was the assignment, and I'm the one who makes the assignment, so that's fun. We did Carrie last week. Go ahead. You'll be the first people to be over-prepared. I've got to do a pod tomorrow night on 12 Years a Slave, so I've got to figure out time to sit down and watch that film, which is, by the way, a riot. I'm just going to sit down and enjoy 2 hours and 14 minutes.
It's a much tougher watch, yeah.
Well, that's part of the, so sometimes the behind the scenes aspect of doing this podcast is, and I've talked about this a little bit recently, where I don't know that a lot of folks know how much goes into it, because I would say for every podcast, I've got about 7 hours into every pod. If there's a book, if someone's got like a book that they're doing kind of with it, and like tomorrow night, we're doing Rob Colby's book, which is called An Unholy Traffic. Right over here, something about slave trading in the Civil War South. So that's the reason why we're doing that film. But usually what that means is I've got to, find the person, schedule the thing, watch the film. So there's 3 hours between finding the person, scheduling it, watch the movie, read the book, which, we're doing like the grad school reading, where you're just kind of at least thumbing through it, intro, conclusion, just getting some ideas of what's in the book. Some talking points.
3 book reviews, intro, conclusion, and skim.
Totally, right? But that's still an hour to 2 hours if you want to do it right, if you really want to. And sometimes you get sucked into the book, which is the hard part.
Which is great.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of them too. And then you got to watch film. So you're like, and then you have to record the pod, which is 2 hours. So you're 7 hours in. It's a lot. So I still have to watch that. We did
minimum 7 hours just watching Scream movies this time.
Well, I'm glad that neither of you have a book that goes with this film, although God
we can
knows
make you a
list.
We both read Carrie last time, so.
Yeah.
Y'all did. I did not.
And there's a lot of literature on Scream. Like, there's a whole set of literature that goes with us. We can send you a list.
Well, okay. So Scream. Well, I mean, I think there's a real reason to talk about Scream, and I guess maybe that's before I start interjecting with my ideas. Why don't you guys talk about? Because I asked you, hey, what film do you want to do? Rachel was just like, if you don't let me do Scream, I'm going to add the rest of the internet to the Tree Trust Circle place and tell everyone who thinks that I know how awful you are as a human. And so I was like, oh, that Scream would be great. So
for the record, no legal blackmail was involved.
What is there legal blackmail? Is it
no blackmail
in and of itself?
The legal definition.
Okay, because I was like, by itself, blackmail is actually illegal. Unless you're the police, then isn't it like what's the word? What's the word they use in the police circles for blackmail? There was entrapment. Yeah, there was a Sean Connery, Catherine Zeta-Jones film where she did the things with the very subtle parts,
and the lasers.
Yeah, it didn't hurt my feelings. I got to tell you. Either way, why Scream? Why are we doing Scream tonight?
I think Scream on its own, right? If you're just looking at the first one, right, which we can just stick to the first one. We don't have to talk about the others. Rachel and I just really
other than give our ranks of them, but
yeah, we just like to be thorough,
Okay.
Just the first one. If you're looking at that, I think Scream is a really good jumping off point for talking about slasher films in general. In part because Scream embodies so many of them, like literally in the text of the film itself, right? You have so many one-off quotes that are from other films. And so when you're looking at that, you really have to have a deep-seated understanding of other films. Or if you are like, I don't understand that, you can sort of point to, and oftentimes they'll just tell you it's from this, right? And so you have to sort of have this understanding of other slasher films to really get Scream. And it's not like a gatekeeping, like, oh, you don't get this film if you haven't seen these other ones, but it helps you have a really deeper appreciation for Scream once you have seen these other films.
Right.
And understand
And
how much it changed the genre, right? If
yeah,
you see what came before and then how everything kind of shifts after Scream.
yeah, that Scream is both its own set of things, but it's also this deep appreciation for the things that came before. It's not trying to change the things that came before necessarily by saying, like, oh, these were bad in a certain way, but it's taking the things that came before. It's a deep appreciation for those things, but it's also setting itself apart in this new sort of era of teen slasher films.
I think Fear Street does a great job of illustrating that because they have the three different types of movies within their trilogy. And so they have like the witchy, colonial America horror film.
Mm.
They have the slasher 1970s at the camp horror film. And then they have the 90s, early 2000s Scream inspired horror film as their like set. And it really does stand as like that is the touch point for that era.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the interesting about Screams is Scream is almost a history of horror films, and I think Wes Craven was very adamant about that, and Kevin Williamson, who wrote Scream, was very much involved, and this is very much a love letter to horror films and this genre. And then this
And
weird thing
making fun of
happens.
them.
Yeah, absolutely. But then what happens is then it reinvigorates the genre as well. We see this whole new aspect because I think, and maybe I'm wrong here, but you've got in the horror film genres, you've got the classic stuff with like Psycho and maybe Texas Chainsaw Chainsaw Massacre is maybe more of a long '80s film more than anything like that. But there's the cult suspense stuff, and then we get the '80s, which you've got Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, the slasher, gore stuff, right? I remember also Children of the Corn when I was a kid in Louisiana. I remember watching that, and maybe that explains why I have text chat groups, why I'm on Raiders of the Lost chat. But there's this, but this film knows this film is this shy, this close to breaking the fourth wall on so
It's very
many
meta.
occasions, right?
Before
Extremely
that was a
meta.
thing.
Right. And then afterwards, we have all of these pop culture wink, wink, nod, nod films. Obviously, the contemporary is I Know What You Did Last Summer. And we get the Final Destination films, all of which are carrying forth this Scream thing. And then I thought Scream was going to end. I thought maybe this was going to be a standalone film. And then they're like, they make too much money. So it's a fascinating study. This is one of those movies where this movie is history in so many different ways.
Well,
So
and they make enough movie that or money, not movie. Well, they do make enough movie. But they make enough money that you then get the Scary Movie spinoff of
yeah,
Scream. And so I think that that in itself is an interesting thing that you have this parody of, like, Scream is not a parody, but like it's got this compilation of all these other things, but like it's got its own genre spinoff, which is really interesting in and of itself that you have this other parody of it. That a lot of people, so many people get the details of those confused with the Scream movies that, like, if you watch them enough, you're like, no, Dewey was the killer, right? Like the first time that I went and rewatched the Scream movies, I was like, no, Dewey is the killer. And then I was like, oh no, Dewey is not the killer. That was Doofus.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. And so I was just like, gosh, but he is pretty incompetent there in the beginning. And so you're just like, like the
nope.
characters are not that far off.
Now, I want to talk about what this film does. Can we talk a little bit about casting first and foremost on this film? This film plays, it's a little bit
Poor
different
Drew
than say,
Barrymore.
well, that was like the big thing at first, because again, this is 1996, which is really pre-internet. Like I graduated high school in 1995, and for information, I had like Microsoft Encarta or something like that. That this was really before you could find out everything. So the big thing was, and they were selling Drew Barrymore, the great curveball. and this is in a lot of ways heating
It was the
society of
Psycho
killing her
twist
off.
amped up to 10, right? So in
Yeah,
Psycho,
absolutely.
of course, the female main character is killed roughly halfway through the film, which still surprised people. But
Mhm.
in this one, we amp it up, right? She's killed in the first scene.
Yeah, and this is a very innocent Drew Barrymore, right? This is a very sweet blonde. What's your favorite movie? And she's kind of playing along until things keep getting weirder and do you remember when you first saw this film? Where were you in 96 when did you see this in 96, or did you have to wait?
Definitely
Are we gonna
not,
get how
because I
old you
was
were?
8 years old.
I was 4.
I wish there was I
As
wish there were
Jason just
whiskey.
takes a
I
sip
hope
of
you,
his
yeah, I
drink.
hope you have a strong drink in that cup.
I actually have green tea in this cup because I'm slowly turning into my great grandmother. Is what's happening as you're telling me how young you are, and I'm just like,
Yeah, did
having a
not see that one in theaters at the ripe old
Probably
age of 4.
12 or 13, watching at home when I
okay.
first saw it.
Yeah, I don't
I had
think I
older
saw
brothers who
Scream
were very
until
into it.
high school. My first like horror slasher film was Halloween 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really get that, terrified me so bad that I didn't really get into, and I saw that as a young child. We had the VHS. And so I watched that. I didn't get into like actual horror films until I was in like solidly in high school.
All right. Well, let's go here because we talk about horror films. Let's talk about the director here. Wes Craven ends up being the director. He turns down this project multiple times before finally accepting it. I made a list here. And made a list, I said I went to Wikipedia and saw some of the other names that were bandied about for directors. George Romero, obviously classic horror guy.
Mm-hmm.
Sam
All the
Raimi,
zombies.
right? Evil Dead is the scariest movie I've ever seen. The original terrifies me. Robert Rodriguez. Can you imagine this film being set in Mexico with a guitar playing hero? Quentin
I can
Tarantino.
imagine a guitar playing villain. I don't know about a hero.
I'm wondering if Quentin Tarantino directs this film, how many F bombs we have.
Lots more feet and choking scenes. Yeah.
Right? But that might actually fit better in a horror genre than everything else maybe
It's
that he's
creepy
ever
enough
done.
that, yeah, it kind of goes with horror more than some of his other
right?
films.
So you get Craven, and Craven was on a down spell. He really needed to come back. Have you ever seen Vampire in Brooklyn?
I haven't.
Don't, and that's exactly right.
Don't.
Yeah.
It's so bad. It's Eddie Murphy, and Craven was trying to do this like horror comedy, and it's awful. Eddie Murphy is fabulously hit and miss with his stuff. When he's on, he's on, and when he's not, he is Nick Cage-esque for taking a paycheck, right?
I'll
so you
stick
got
to Happy
this.
Death Day for my horror comedy.
I'm just imagining
Thank
Nick
you.
Cage in a horror movie now.
Well, he's recently
we
in
kind of
Long
get that
Legs.
one with the Dracula one, right?
No, Long
yeah.
Legs. He's in Long Legs right now, which is a horror film.
Is he? Oh.
Yes, you need to watch that. I mean, we actually I think about doing that one here on the pod. I have a very good friend of mine who absolutely hates that film, and I'm thinking about inviting her on. You also have some a little bit different here because you've got some big people. You've got Courtney Cox in this film, and this is when Friends is on and really in its early prime. Now, Friends runs for like 37 seasons, but they get Courtney Cox in this film. Who else do they get over here? And then you've got
David Arquette.
maybe is he a person? Because that's one of the weird things. Because that's what our nostalgia does to us, right? We think of David Arquette in relation to Scream and know he's a name, but was he when this film was made? You got Liev Schreiber,
Not even
one
Courtney
of my favorite
Cox
actors.
was really
No,
a name when it was made. Not the way she was by the end of Friends.
Yeah.
No, and I think this was kind of helps to build her. And then you've got for the role of Sydney, the most important
Neve
role,
Campbell,
this
right?
complete unknown, right? When does Party of Five come out? She's also on television right around the same time.
Yeah, I think she had done Party of Five, but it had been on, but it wasn't like she was the household name people were expecting to be the final girl.
No, and actually, so there were 3 finalists. Actually, there were a couple other ones. Reese Witherspoon was considered. She looked too young.
That is a very different movie.
This movie
I'm
is
trying to picture
Nashville.
Sydney with a slightly southern accent now.
Oh my, slightly, just very. It's got to be set in. It's like it's Sweet Home Alabama with knives.
On a
Yeah.
horror film. Yeah.
I'm not opposed to this. This is okay to me.
I'm just thinking through all of the romantic comedies that I can think of that would make good horror films, and I feel like Sweet Home Alabama is not a bad
It's right
choice
up
to
there.
turn into a horror film. That or like your
10
favorite
Things I Hate
Christmas
About You.
Hallmark
Not 10 Things I
movie.
Hate About You. What was the How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days? That would be a good
That
horror
could be a
film.
good horror film.
You murder
This
him,
could
and
be-
over 10 days, you
This could be
chop
a
up the
new
body.
genre. Like romantic comedies turned horror films could be a new genre.
I
I
feel
would like to
like
pitch this.
I think you're right. I think that the Hallmark Channel has a real market for this. Like you
Yeah.
get Lacey Chabert, who's in some of these films.
Yeah.
She's like
you take
Hallmark steady.
Yeah, you take Hallmark Christmas movies and you pitch the romantic ones to the gals, and then you do the like Santa murders people, same plot line, but Santa turns into a murderer, and pitch those to the guys.
I'm down with this, especially if we
Same
need
Silent
actors.
Night was kind of that, but without the romance.
Exactly. So you take the Silent Night thing and you pitch a rom-com version of that. Same actors, you just pay them a little bit longer to shoot some slightly different scenes, and you got 2 movies.
I like this idea. In fact,
It's like how Netflix, it's like how Netflix, when it thinks that I'm watching something, will put a hot guy on the cover. But when it thinks when my husband is watching something, it'll put a hot chick on the cover. You just pitch the different movies to different people that you think are streaming.
How does it do that? Do you
I don't know.
two of you watch at different times?
Algorithms. I don't know.
I
don't do that.
You know what? I was scrolling through Instagram the other night, and I don't know what happened to my algorithms, because my algorithms are pretty much like bodybuilding and fishing, and I don't even know what else, right? And it got stuck on like Christian victimization videos where people are like, in this house, we say Merry Christmas and God bless you if you don't like it. And the woman listens to the man. And I was like, is this, did I go to high school with this person? It's
Scroll up.
No. And I was trying to figure out how to like get my algorithms back. I was like, what? Because then I would respond, right? Which would only trigger even more of them. I was like, I am so sorry for you.
That's what you've done. You stayed up too late one night and you accidentally clicked something and then you screwed up your whole algorithm.
Although some algorithms are better than others, YouTube thinks I'm a Black woman who is fluent in Spanish, and none of those things are true.
Yeah.
You're better at this, Rachel, because your TikTok game is much better, and I still can't figure out TikTok. I'm trying so hard, and I can't get there. I want to give you another name for a possible city. This is the opposite of Reese Witherspoon. You ready? Molly Ringwald.
I'm assuming she was a little too old to play the high school character.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing, right? She's just, and I'm a big fan of Molly Ringwald. If you grew up in the 80s, you have to be.
Yeah.
Way too old.
I mean, we're a little too far into the 90s for her to play 17-year-old-ish.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Okay, so here are the last 3. Alicia Vitt.
Although I say that, but how many high school movies have we seen with like 30-year-old actors?
Yeah.
Playing 17-year-olds?
Beverly Hills 90210. Remember the woman, Gabrielle Carteris, was 30 playing a 17-year-old.
Or they have these like jacked guys with the shoulders and they're supposed to be like 16-year-old boys. Like, no. That was not around in high school.
As a fellow jacked guy with shoulders, I mean, it happens. I mean, I wasn't that way. The question I get asked all the time is like, what position did you play in college? And I'm like, trombone. So, there's that. We get Brittany Murphy gets bandied about is the idea.
I can see that.
Yeah, she's been a good one.
She was good. She was a really talented actress when she was on her game. She was so good in a movie with Alicia Silverstone. Clueless. She was so great in that. She was great in 8 Mile. And then just had these horrible issues. And then, of course, Neve Campbell, who turns out to be the perfect.
She was in a horror movie, right? She was in a psychological thriller where, like, her mind was broken and the psychiatrist had to, like, figure out what she'd seen or else
she made the things with the eyes. Yeah, I can't remember. It was probably Jennifer Lopez was in the movie or something like that. Remember she did The Cell?
It was good.
With Vince Vaughn. And his forehead was higher than mine.
The Cell was not good. But the Brittany Murphy movie, that was good.
I don't remember that. If you're listening in, tell us what the Brittany Murphy movie is. We'll do something. And of course, you had W. Earl Brown, Kenny, in the he was the guy in the van with Gail.
Yeah.
he's important because he's from my high school. Like he's from my
Oh,
hometown.
nice.
So
He gets a
we're big
nice
fans of ours.
callback in the other movies from the cameraman who doesn't want to stick around after he finds out what happened to
You
Kenny.
you know he is one of those guys who is a classic character actor, and you've seen him in so much different stuff. You'll see him in Deadwood, or you'll see him. He's actually in the Mandalorian. Like you show up, the big thing, obviously, something about Mary. He's in. He's gonna give you a performance, and you recognize him. You're like, all right, great, good. I can trust him with the next 6 minutes of dialogue, right, and then moving on. Ooh, Brooke Shields and Janine Garofalo were considered for Courtney Cox's role.
Mm.
I wonder.
I could see Brooke Shields pulling that off.
Yeah.
She's a little old, but again, the age thing, right? I mean,
but to be the reporter,
Yeah, to be
you
the
don't
reporter,
necessarily
I
have
don't
to be
know.
young.
I think you
Yeah.
have to exude a certain amount of like likable hostility, if that's a thing,
Right.
to do that role, which I think Courtney Cox is like right there in the middle. I think people were used to seeing her in that, and that's why she was so good with that.
Well,
Yeah.
speaking of likable hostility, can we talk about Skeet Ulrich? Billy, what are your thoughts on his casting?
I think he gives off the perfect amount of crazy that, like, I think the good thing with that character, right, is that the first time that you're watching this film, like the very first time you see this film and this character, you the entire time are like, I'm pretty sure he's killing people, like,
Right.
but then you're like, no,
That's
he
too
can't be doing
obvious.
right. Yes,
He
like that's
seems
your
like the red
Too
instinct.
herring.
obvious
You're
that
like,
he's the bad
you're
guy.
like, no, they're not going to do that. That's stupid. And then there are certain points where you're like, well, no, he can't have done it.
He
And
was
like,
here and the killer was there. And,
yeah, right. So
But
like,
then it
if you
turns
have
out there
not
are
seen
two.
the film, this podcast is not for you. They're spoilers. Yeah, because there's two, right?
This movie's 28
Caveat
years
for
old.
the-
I think we're okay.
I don't know,
How
man.
is
Some
this
people
movie
get
almost
mad.
30 years old?
Some people get mad.
They
So,
can
as we
fuck
have
off.
learned while doing the Sunday Night Live posts,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, okay, that's a little that's a little different. But if you're coming to a pod on a
yeah,
28-year-old movie,
I don't know.
people listen to pods they've heard about movies they've seen. There's got to be like a relationship to. Otherwise,
That's fair.
they don't want to listen to it. But yeah,
And so, like,
um,
you think that he's like a little bit crazy, but then you're like, I don't know.
He's
I knew some teenage boys
charismatic
that were a little bit
crazy.
crazy, right? You're like, okay, is this like the kind of crazy that you would expect from a teenage boy? Or is this like more than that kind of crazy? So, like, I think you don't want to think that like it would be that obvious, but then at the end you're like, I knew it the whole time. Right.
And I think it works that they don't make him too nice. Like, he is a bit of an ass.
Yeah.
he
And you're
is.
like, but is he
is.
just an ass or is he the killer too?
Yeah.
The curve is that there is no curve, right? And I mean that's it's actually it turns out the pitch is actually a fastball straight down the middle, right? And it ends up working, except that there's a second killer playing along,
And that they've been at it all along. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's one of the things that makes this so frustratingly believable for women, especially like teenage girls, but I mean, women generally, is that you look at this character, Billy, right? And you're like, is this man crazy and going to kill me? Or is he just like a normal amount of crazy that's not going to kill me? Right. I think that that's like frustratingly believable for a lot of women, that you're just like, is he a little odd? Or is he a psycho killer? And I think that that's like a very fine line that women watching this film are like, I am familiar with that man. And that I think is a very realistic thing that this film brings that other slasher films don't, right? That like when you see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre guy, you're like, that's a killer. And you run from it. But this is her boyfriend. This is somebody that she trusts, right?
This is a little
And
more
so-
Ted Bundy than Ed Gein. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but like she is like, when he gets out of the police station, like she still doesn't quite trust him, right? After he's been let go, she's still like churning in her mind these questions of like, maybe not.
But he's hot, so do I want to sleep with him?
But he's hot. And also she has a like relationship with him that goes before these things. And so you have to sort of like weigh those things. And I think that that's a very realistic thing that we see here. That for a lot of people watching this, you're like, girlfriend, like red flags, but also like you have to weigh that context.
Is he a murderer or is he just a bad boy?
Yeah.
Also, dead mom, absent dad, crappy group of friends. Like,
Yeah.
what are her options there?
Yeah, exactly. So like, are you going to throw away this one sort of like moderately stable thing just because he seems a little crazy right now? But like,
And it's your friend group. So if you break up with him, you're breaking up the friend group. And
yeah, who are also a little bonkers, but like,
I
that's
feel
your
like
friend
you're
group.
writing the pitch for the new dating website that we're going to create out there somewhere just for scholars. We're like, is he a plagiarist or does he love me? I don't know. So, can we
Maybe
talk
he's
Very F.
about
born
the
with
Scott
it.
rules?
Fitzgerald
Maybe
of
it's
you.
ChatGPT.
I have F. Scott Fitzgerald back over here. So, I had to
Well,
watch. I had
cheers
to
to
read
Zelda,
Tender
since some of her work is definitely in whichever book you have.
Zelda. What a horrible, horrible, wretched woman. We should do
Whose work he stole left and right. But, whatever.
because he's a bad boy. Can we talk? And that's why she left him. Can we talk about the rules of this? Because so much of this is about setting up
Film
the
rules.
rules of, and then bending or breaking them or abiding by them whenever it works for the plot. So can you guys enlighten us if we're going to make a horror film here at HATM Film Productions? What are the rules to making a horror film?
Yeah.
And we should say these are the rules for the first film in a series,
Yes.
because later on the
Yes.
sequels have different
Yes.
rules
The
for
rules
sequels,
change.
different rules
Yes.
for a
They grow.
trilogy.
Right. So what's the first film? And what are we
Yes.
naming this film?
Our film?
Yeah, The Sharpest Pen. I don't know. So
I don't know.
Is our final
Rough
girl an
draft.
academic? Is the killer an academic, or both?
I think, listen, I don't know of a single academic who doesn't have some sort of like death wish. So I think everyone is an academic. It's a bunch of people at a conference. Yeah, it's a
Conference killers.
We'll call it round table. So, or something like this. But yes, okay.
More of a comment than a question.
Right. All right. Yeah.
I think that's the film title.
All right. All right. Comment and a question. All right. So, what are our rules for comment and a question?
If we're playing by OG Scream rules, rule number 1, never have sex. Rule number 2,
never drink is going to really go out the window.
Yeah, never
in an
drink.
academic
Everybody's
conference.
dead. Everybody's dead at our conference.
I think
whole
maybe I
point of
live
going to
because
a
I
conference.
mask. If they don't have outdoor drinks, I survive by default.
Yeah, never drink or do drugs. And then rule number 3 is never, ever, ever say, I'll be right back.
Because you won't be back. You'll be dead.
Yeah, you will be dead. Which means you can't ever really leave a session to go pee, because every time you like pat your chair and be like, I'll be right back.
Can I tell you a thing? I don't go to sessions. I can't stand.
I pretend to go to sessions.
I'll go to
How
round
dare
tables.
you.
I'll go to round tables. I will
Yeah.
not have,
Especially
4
with how
papers
many people
read to
you
me.
know in the industry. Like, go to those sessions and support your peeps.
I will support them at the book fair or at the bar or at the museums that we tend to, because that's where the real conversations take place.
You heard it here.
Also-
Jason will only support you if you've already had your first book out.
I will only support you if you don't put me to fucking sleep at a conference, because that's what
I
happens when I
think you
sit
sort
there.
of roll in at the tail end of the session and watch the people ask hostile questions, and then you support your
Always
friends.
fun.
Yeah,
Right, then I
or
can jump in and be like, have you ever seen a fight break out at a conference, like an actual fight, or like been afraid that people were about to get into a fight?
I
not
saw someone realize
fist
their
fight.
entire dissertation was false.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Okay, that's a good reason to go to a conference, though,
Yeah.
to get feedback.
have
Their
seen
premise
Better to
was
find out
incorrect.
I've seen people
Okay.
cuss each other out like in the middle of a session, and then the moderator had to go get somebody to come and break that up. 'cause
Were they
like,
the
not
same? Were
comfortable
they
with it.
on the panel, or was it a guest, or was it an audience
There
member?
was-
And
It was an audience member and the person on the panel, because they were like
Oh.
attacking the person on the panel. I don't know what their beef was. I assume there was some OG beef from grad school. Who knows? But they were like screaming at each other about a question, and then they started cussing at each other, and the moderator like did not know what to do about that. So they went to go get somebody. They went to go tell mom.
I haven't been screamed at about a history paper since I was at the University of Minnesota, but that's another story entirely. I had one professor who would just fucking yell at me. I don't like your work. I'm like, I guess let's hear about how bad I am because you don't like my history paper. Are things okay at home? You know? Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, okay, so all right, so no sex at the conference, no alcohol. Okay, the second rule's done. Everyone's gonna die. And no, I'll be right back. So all right, fair enough.
Although I feel like
The,
I'll be right back is the for academics would be like, I'll finish the paper when I get there. I'll finish the paper in the morning.
okay, we should talk
I'll do it on the
because
plane. I'm going to get the plane Wi-Fi, finish doing
Hmm.
that, which will definitely work. I'm going to get the plane Wi-Fi, finish it on the plane. All I have to do are my footnotes.
as this preps
So
up,
format those.
as we get ready, I'm prepping up a paper that based on my master's thesis, which I haven't looked at in almost a decade, and I am desperate to remember what the hell that I said. So, and I'm trying to get this to the commenter because I don't want to leave him out. If you're listening in, like right now, you don't want to leave your commenter high and dry. You want to give them some sense of what you're going to say so that they can say something that sounds smart too. And I feel bad because I've never been this way. I am bad about being really late on book reviews.
You're an
Horribly.
academic. Welcome to the party.
I saw a thing the other day. A guy was talking about, like, I haven't been able to get anyone to sign on to do a book review since June. And the answer is easy. It's because you're not paying them for labor, and it is labor. And
It is labor,
um,
and some presses aren't even providing actual books anymore. It's just an ebook version.
The digital copy.
Yeah.
that's a hard pass. You know, if I can't at least put it up on my shelf to make it look like I've done a thing, that says I have 3 that are due already. So,
Nicole says I'm not allowed to do book reviews until my book is being reviewed. So I'm following the friendship rule.
Yeah. I'm Rachel's
I
manager
have
at this point.
I have to meet with the press next week when I'm in there. It's like, hey, you want to get together? I was like, don't ask me how my book is coming. What are your favorite parts of this film? What is this movie doing well for you?
I love the little in jokes with Nev Campbell making fun of horror movies, and then when the killer shows up, she does the exact same thing, running up the stairs instead of
Mm-hmm.
out the front door, and
Right,
all of that. But yet she's still a fighter. She's not an idiot while she's doing it.
right.
I point of contention, Rachel.
Ooh.
I I think that this film has terrible weapon safety. Um, generally, Rachel and I talked about this when we were watching all of the Scream movies. Um,
I
there's
may have photographs on my phone of a certain academic in the room brandishing a knife in the
demonstrating,
proper way versus the
demonstrating,
way villains do it in this film.
Oh,
demonstrating.
because they do it like this, right?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
And
so
the blade should face the other way.
they hold it blade in instead of blade out, right? And so, like, terrible weapon safety, they're always holding this thing with a blade facing towards themselves so that if somebody grabs it, it's going to end up back at you and cutting you, right? You always want the blade to be facing out so that if they end up grabbing it, they're going to grab it with the blade on their hand and slice their hand, right? That is
Yeah.
proper blade safety. Plus, when Dewey is when Dewey is running around the house, just lessons in weapon safety. When Dewey is running around the house after they get the phone call, which is presumably what's his face from jail, right? They get the phone call at their house. He is running around the house with his gun. He's got his finger on the trigger, like
Yeah,
literally
Well
on
basic
the
gun
dressed
safety,
trigger.
guys.
guys.
But Dewey's supposed to be incompetent.
True.
Yeah,
You know,
but
there are all
also
these
like
signs to his incompetence.
you're a cop, so like basic weapon safety. And so just like throughout the film, the whole time, just like people like, oh my gosh. So
All
I'm
right.
like, y'all.
Let me ask you this, because you just made a very good point. We see the film open up. Uh, it's Drew Barrymore. She's on her phone. It's in the house, but it's 1996. Cell phones are not like a thing yet, where everybody's
Cell
got
phones
them.
would
Sure as
ruin
hell,
this movie.
right? Aren't texting, right? How is this film? Can we talk about the other ways in which this film is devoutly a product of the mid 1990s? We've got
She's got her computer
landlines.
chat up,
Oh
right? She
yeah,
tries to
right.
contact 911 over her computer.
Mm-hmm.
I think these films would not be functional in an open concept house, right? Like these are still
Yeah,
homes.
how do you run through the hallways and
Yeah,
stuff
you
and
can't
hide?
slam the
And
Oh
door
my
on
gosh, you're
somebody,
right.
right? Like, so if you are looking if you are looking
Modern
at
architecture would
houses,
ruin this film.
yeah, slasher films can't happen in post
you
what
just keep running around the center if you're like,
2003-ish, right? So
You're
you
running
get
around
the
the
like
kitchen island
giant,
the
yeah.
whole time.
right? You're just going in circles.
Right.
And so like you can't really do that. You can't do that in an open concept house, or even the like giant houses. Like you need a sort of like smallish house so that you can do the whole thing where you run outside or you run upstairs and then you're trapped. If you do this in the like giant houses that we started building, the like mega mansion houses that we started building in the McMansions of the early
Mhm.
2000s, right? You just have infinite amounts of house to run and hide in. And so you have to have a certain 90s aesthetic to these houses, or even like earlier than that aesthetic to these houses to make this work, right? Otherwise, you're running around some other place that is not functional for a slasher film.
I mean, our
I have another
basement
point.
somehow has a garage door anyway, which is a bit strange.
Yeah.
Well, if you're on a hill, maybe it works.
Yeah.
And
I
you
mean, you
can
have
have
other
it in California.
settings, right? You have other settings that work for this. So, like, for example, who is it? It's Carol J. Clover's book, right? So she does Men, Women, and Chainsaws, which is talking about gender and horror and these sorts of things. She characterizes this as the terrible place, right? She's really known for the final girl theory. That's sort of her like big thing in this book. But she also has this thing that she characterizes as the terrible place that in films, right? It's the mansion in the Bates Mansion, right? It's the house in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's in Friday the 13th. It is the camp, right? And so it doesn't have to be a house, right? So, like in Friday the 13th, it's the campgrounds. It doesn't have to be a singular house, but it does have to be this sort of finite space. And she says in her work that it's this sort of space where something terrible has already happened, that you sort of have this space that's supposed to be a place of comfort, like a house or like a teen camp or whatever, that's supposed to be this place of comfort, but something terrible has happened there. And so then you have these other people that are there, and through their horrifying experience with whoever's running to chase them and kill them, they soon discover the horrors that have already happened there before. And I think where Scream differs in this is not just that there's not necessarily something horrible that's already happened in some of these spaces. Like you don't have Jason Voorhees' mom that's already killed camp counselors, right? You don't have that necessarily history in that space. But these aren't necessarily singular spaces. These are just teen spaces, right? These aren't haunted places. It's not like the Amityville Horror House that you think of
Poltergeist.
negatively, right? And so it's not like this ominous space. These are just teen spaces.
Even in Sydney's house, they don't make a big deal of the fact that, canonically her mother would have been killed in the house as she looked out the window and watched Cotton or someone in his jacket walk away. But they don't play on like, this was the room she was killed. They don't even tell us like which room it was.
Exactly. If anything, like most of the killing is happening in these other spaces, right? It's the house where they have the party. It's the van. It's the school, right? A lot of these are other spaces that are just sort of teenage spaces. And so it's sort of in Scream removing that idea of these terrible places being tied to this history and more tying these terrible spaces to being a teenager. Which I think is an important shift that we see in Scream, and really an important sort of conversation about the 90s and the kind of conversation it's having about being a teenager.
I want to ask you this. Another sign, go back to the 90s. Could Sydney kill Stu with a contemporary television? Because I've got a 65
There's an argument that she
television
never killed Stu with the
left.
original television.
Ooh,
right? Because he almost came back in a sequel and then it leaked online, and so they had to change the whole script. And so he is still arguing that he should come back, that he would not have died from that injury.
Listen, Matthew Lillard just wants to get paid.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him.
Yeah.
And he had so much fun playing Stu.
Listen, those Scooby-Doo royalties are not going to last forever.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and he
so
talks about that very openly. Like, I was just watching an interview from him on TikTok the other day where he talks about how Scooby-Doo is actually one of the worst things that happened, right? That he, for a long time, didn't like Scooby-Doo because after that, he thought that he was going to have all of this success after Scooby-Doo. He thought that these phone calls were going to be rolling in for him to take bigger and bigger roles, and then they just
yeah.
didn't. And he talks about how he really struggled with that and struggled to feed his family after that. And so I think that he was really hoping that more stuff would come from Scream potentially. I think that the bigger problem for his character is not the TV thing, it's that he was stabbed repeatedly. And he talks before that about how he's like dizzy and bleeding out and all of this. So
Mhm.
I think he would have died from the blood loss before he would have died
That
from the
tends to
TV.
happen.
But also,
Right?
the killer always makes the comeback, right?
Yeah, that's fair. So
Right. Yeah.
got to
Another
double
reason.
tap.
Exactly.
Zombieland
I want to
rules.
ask. I want to ask you this: are Gail and Dewey the worst couple in film history?
Oh
I
no,
don't
we've
think they're
seen
the
much
worst
worse.
couple, and yeah, not in film history. Certainly not.
Here's the weird part, because of course these two get married and I think have kids together, in real life, and I, for the life of me, cannot see the chemistry at all. And it's like, why would Courtney Cox be with David Arquette? I mean, this isn't even like an unconventionally handsome guy or something, like with the way we would say like about somebody. He's not a handsome guy. So how does this happen?
Maybe she was having a crisis after her bangs. I mean, if I had bangs that looked like that for so long and they were enshrined in television history or like movie history, I would probably also go through a bit of a crisis.
All right, I want
But
to
he's
ask you
also
on
funny and could actually make her laugh, and that goes a long way.
does it?
It does. When men and women talk about having a sense of humor, we mean two separate things, at least the sociological literature on this says so. That men mean someone who will laugh at their jokes, who finds
Mm-hmm.
them funny, whereas women mean someone who can actually make them laugh.
Well, that's easy.
That's
So,
fair.
I want to ask you
Wait,
this:
but
what
if
are the
that's
parts
easy for you, maybe that's why you don't get it, because you're a little bit like him.
I mean, I like to think I'm handsomer than him, but I mean, barely. Um,
I
she's not
love
my
that the
type
screen
anyway.
glitched for just half a second and made you blurry just as you said. You thought you were handsomer.
You know, I used to get people would tell me I look like Ricky Gervais, and they would mean it as a compliment. I'm like, why would you say that to me when there are all these mountains I can throw myself off of? So,
I
it
don't
does
think you look
matter.
like Ricky Gervais. Sorry.
Thank you. We can be hurt. One of the parts of this, are there parts of this movie that drive you nuts? Is there anything that makes you go, I don't know how I feel about this?
I'm not a huge fan of them pitting the female characters against each other at the start. I mean, they do kind of come around to seeing each other's point of view, but
Mm-hmm.
they're definitely like pitted to set up a cat fight at the start.
Are you talking
Yeah.
about the Sydney versus Gale stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What else? That's
I
there's got to be
think
more
one of
stuff.
the things that I find a little bonkers, and maybe this is just from our modern perspective, is that they are like, hey, the whole town is going to go on lockdown, right? There's a curfew at 9 p.m. because there's shenanigans happening. So everybody has to be home by 9 p.m. And the whole town is just like, yeah, man, let's do it. And it's like, what? Like, that is the most unrealistic thing that
And
I've ever heard
also,
of.
let's do it with like the 3 cops we have in this town. We're not bringing in
Yeah.
any other law enforcement. There's no
Yeah.
like national media wondering why all of these high school kids have been slaughtered. Like, nope,
Yeah.
just go about our day.
Yeah. All of the
Yeah,
business owners are like, yeah, that seems reasonable. Everybody shut down. No big problem.
9 p.m.
Okay.
Good to go. All right,
Yeah.
that's fair.
But yeah, that is definitely post-COVID. We kind of know
Yeah.
how
I
that
was
would
just like,
go.
friend.
Well, how does this film change? Like after we talk about this film ending, we got the surprises, we got the twists, and
We killed the Fonz,
we killed,
which
right?
is one of my
What
favorite
happens?
scenes in the movie.
what happens next? Like, how does this franchise change over time? We have this initial entry in, and Scream comes in and makes a bunch of money. It's produced for like $15 million. They make just a boatload of films on this. Everybody's immediately signed back up to do sequels, of course. What
If they
happens
lived.
next? If they lived, right? What happens next for Sydney? And what happens? What are the rules that change as the Screen franchise continues on? Because we're now into what, 6 or 7 of these films at this point in time?
Yeah, 7 I think is about to come out.
Yeah, I think we're at 7. Yeah,
They're working on it, right? I think
Yeah.
right.
we
I think
watched
Sydney's been in
6.
all but 1, correct?
Yeah,
I
the last one,
believe
it
so.
was, she's talked about, but she never appears. Her character never
And I
appears
think
on
she's
screen.
coming back for the next one, as I understand it, because Nev Campbell also wants to get paid. So what changes moving forward? You guys said you went and watched all 7 of these or all 6 of these, whatever. What are the rules and how do they change moving forward? Because I kept thinking
Go ahead.
Sydney's got to be the killer at some point in time. That's
Well, and
my
they
thing.
did
It's
a
like,
twist
Sydney
on
has to be
that
the
with
murderer.
4, right? When it's her
How-
niece,
Okay.
which is the stand-in for her, right? So they do a twist on that. The rules really change in the 3rd one because they make a huge thing about the trilogy rules, throw the first rules out the window, and the trilogy always has to rewrite what we thought happened in the first film, right?
Right.
All of that stuff. So the movie rules they're talking about change the most in the 3rd.
Were you surprised that they killed Dewey off?
No, I felt like they had to kill one of the OG3 by that point. Like, you can't really, if you're Scream, you can't have a safe character, right? With the way the whole thing started, you've got to be willing to throw somebody under the bus.
Well, and at
Are you
that point,
surprised
I
that-
honestly don't know. I don't know when they got divorced.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know if that was necessarily because he was the one that they were originally going to kill off. Like, I think that your logic there is sound, but I don't know if he was the one that they were
They had been
intending to
divorced
kill
for a
off.
while before they made that, I thought.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know that they stopped working together pretty much altogether. But I couldn't remember when their divorce actually was.
Are you surprised they haven't killed Sydney off entirely?
She's the hardest one to kill off, right? She's the
Well,
one.
she's like Jamie Lee Curtis of this franchise at this
Yeah,
point in
I
time.
think for her character to die off, you have to have the new Sydney, the new final girl, really set. And so I think she might be fair game in the next one, but I think we needed at least 1 to 2 films of the new final girl before Sydney's on the chopping block.
But they haven't really been able to establish that. I think that's been maybe one of the weaknesses of, because for whatever reason, Nev Campbell, she's been in a bunch of stuff. I like her as an actress, but she's never been able to break from this. It's always going to come back to Scream, right? For her, her presence is so necessary. You can't have Scream without Sydney. And I think, like, when you watch these films where they lessen her role in the film as a way to like bring on somebody else, you just feel it, do you not? I mean, it's just I don't know that we've seen a comparable person in these films yet. I feel like they've been searching for that next person. I just haven't seen it yet. I mean, I thought Jenna Ortega might be that person, but she's out.
She was that person, right? 2 full films.
Right.
She was the final girl, right? And
Right.
then all the other stuff, so she's not in the next one. So we'll see. I have no idea where they're going to go with the next one without her, because it was clearly setting up for her to be the new Sydney.
Right. I want to ask you this. You talked about rankings earlier. You want to give us your rankings of the Scream films backwards to your number 1?
I think number 2 is probably my least favorite.
Why?
Like, the even ones are my least favorite because they very much feel like filler. Like, when we were watching these, we said that the odd ones were the best. The even ones were not as good because they very much feel like filler for the other ones. It kind of reminds me of the Pirates of the Caribbean, where the second one feels like it's just getting to the third film from the first one. And that's
Scream
sort of
2 feels like a replay of Scream 1. I mean, even the
Yeah.
killer is just an extension of Billy, right? Because it's Billy's mom.
Right.
Spoiler alert. And it's the
Yeah.
one they rushed, right? Because the script leaked and they had to move fast. And so it doesn't always make a lot of sense.
Yeah. It could have been 45 minutes shorter and still been fine. And so there's a handful of things that you need from Scream 2 to get to Scream 3. But otherwise,
That's
it's
it.
just sort of filler.
You just need
Um,
her necklace and you're good.
yeah. And so
Well,
it
and
just
you could
doesn't stand alone very well.
no, and you could do this with like a television series. Like not every episode has to be, a hit. In fact, you almost have to make like a playlist in some ways where you bring it down a little bit and come back up. But with films, it's different because you don't know that you're going to get to that next movie. Correct?
Yeah.
So for me,
What's
the
your
second worst one would be 6 because
yeah?
they did not stick that landing. That twist just
No,
did not work.
Yeah.
do tell.
Too many killers, too much going on, and the reveal just doesn't work.
What about your? What are we? We're now into position number
Third
4.
from last.
Third from last. Yeah, position number 4. What we got?
Number 4, the last of the
Okay,
evens.
so we're sticking with evens. Okay.
Yeah, all
Why?
3 of the evens are in the bottom of my list. 4 is the closest, like it's the best of the even ones. It's the one where they try to do almost like the spinoff with Sydney's niece being the final girl, and then she ends up being the killer, which kind of works. They do a lot with like live streaming and that sort of thing. And I think there's a movie podcast in that one where the high school film students have their own film podcast about horror films and all of that. So it really plays into the internet age of it. But I don't think it's as great at doing that in a really smart, witty way, the way that Scream 1 was about its culture and its moment in time.
Yeah. It feels like it's really forced in doing that. Like they're trying to modernize it, but it's really
almost found
forced.
footage meets Scream.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that going to be influenced by Blair Witch Project? Is that really what we're looking at?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that was another film that really kind of revolutionized it. God. And again, you could do so much pre-internet.
Campaign.
Jesus. Blair Witch Project was terrible. Because there was this real thing, and I think this was, 98 or so, that they found this stuff. And all of a sudden, it's this documentary that's on in my small town in Kentucky. And like everybody's going to see it.
I think we're back to fake documentaries.
It works, but it works, and we see this as a cyclical thing, and I think that's the reason why these Scream films kind of pick back up with interest as time. I mean, because they're making them now for almost 3 decades. They've almost, in some ways, become the thing that they were kind of critiquing early on. I mean, because God knows how many Texas Chainsaw films they've
Little formulaic, yeah.
Yeah.
What's in your third spot?
Mine, which is the one where I might be mixing these up now. Which is the one where the chick comes back as the FBI, the FBI agent? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, that's 5, right?
Is that 5?
Where she was stabbed in 4, and then now she's
yeah.
Yeah, it's either 5 or 6. She comes back.
I think it's 5. That would be my next one.
But yeah, 5 is still better than 6.
That was a good move. Yeah, I thought that was a good move. I liked that. That would be my next one. It took me a minute to remember who she was when they brought her back.
Yeah, because she's not a big deal in 4.
Yeah, she's not. But then I thought that the use of her character. So they have a character who's not a big deal in one of the ones, and she's a victim that gets stabbed.
I don't know.
Is it Hayden? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they bring her back, and she's like an FBI agent later.
Out of nowhere. We went from high school kids to FBI agent in like one film.
Weird.
Okay.
Because that's how that works. Look at her career trajectory. And so she goes and she comes back to the town, and she's like, I'm going to help on this investigation, essentially. And so she then
and she's around in the 6 as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Because then she's there when all of that sort of hits the fan.
Is she good? Is she a good guy? I have not made it through 6.
You don't know going into it, but spoiler alert, she ends up being good.
Yeah.
Okay. Does she survive?
They sort of throw some doubt into it.
Well, she was also in that Sydney Sweeney, Nev Campbell kind of thing, because she played a high schooler television and then kind of did some stuff, and then has now found herself into, and again, not a name, but someone we recognize, right?
Yeah.
What you got
She
for number
played a
2?
high schooler forever. She
Yeah.
had that baby face. She'd be 17 forever.
My runner-up is number 3, Scream
Yeah.
3. I love
Why?
rewriting the history, right? Learning that we didn't really know the story and figuring out the
Mhm.
mystery of it, which is why I like horror movies to begin with, is always trying to figure out the story.
I
Yeah.
hate horror movies, and we do this every single year.
Doing this backwards was so difficult because I was like, definitely it was like 1, 3, 5. And then I was like,
Right.
and then it was
I
some
wrote
mixture.
mine on a piece of paper real quick so I could do them in reverse without thinking.
I was like definitely 1, 3, then 5. And then it was probably, I don't know, like 6 and then 4 and 2 or 2 and 4.
Okay.
But doing that backwards
Yeah, it was
was
4,
so
6,
difficult.
2. So yeah, we were close.
It was so hard to do backwards.
So we all agree the OG is the best
Is
of
the
the
best.
series,
Yeah,
correct?
definitely the best one.
Why? So just because it's the best, it's the tightest, it's the most inventive, like why?
And it sets the standard that they all the rest play with, right?
Mhm.
One reason I like 5 is because we bring Billy back, right? It's this weird thing where he's back in the mix, and then we have his offspring relatives running around doing stuff, and we don't know if she's good or bad or how that's going to cut. But yeah, they set the mold that all the other films are playing with.
I also feel like some of it is a nostalgia thing. Because like I obviously was not old enough to see this in
No, you were
in
4
theaters
in
in theaters
1996.
when
Thank
this
you for
came
that.
out. But I was a product of the 90s, right? And so a lot of the stuff that I look at when I see this
Grunge is
film,
older than you, Nicole.
that I look at when I see this, like some of the things that I looked at when I see this, I'm like, students. So like I had a student in one of my classes today. We were talking about I was just telling my husband this. We were talking about the telegram and the telegraph, and I was teaching them about those things. And one of my students sort of diverted from that because we were talking about like how it runs through the ground and how then we run it through the Atlantic and that sort of stuff. And one of my students is asking about the internet, and he was like, "Hey, my mom says that the internet like used to turn on the internet, and then it made this like noise." And I was like, yeah.
Play the noise for a man.
I do in my 1302.
To be fair,
and
the internet,
like,
a lot of it still runs through cables.
Yeah.
Right?
And
not
so
everything
I was like,
is Wi-Fi.
I was like, yeah. And he was like, so like, why though? And I was like, so it was connected to the phone line, like the landline.
And if someone
and one of my
picked up
other
the house
students
phone,
was like, well,
you were
what's
knocked off.
One of my other
My
students was like, well,
grandmother,
what's a
all the time.
landline? And I was like, so back in the olden day, we had cellular phones and we had landlines that were like connected to the ground.
You didn't bring in a rotary phone.
Wires to the ground.
With the extra long cord so you can so
you can twirl it around your finger. And so
no, so you can like go into your room.
Be like, hang up.
Yeah. Go on.
This is a party line. And so I'm like, and so it ran into the ground. And they were like, oh, like the telegraph machine. And I was like, yes, like the telegraph machine. And they were like, so you like did the internet, like the telegraph machine? And I was like, for the purposes of this discussion, yes.
And also, if any of your cell phones are AT&T, that is still named after the telegram and telephone.
I was like,
I'm going to get in my Conestoga wagon and ride home and cry later.
I know. I was just like, whoa, buddy. But I think one of the things that I look back out on this film, right, is that like you had these numbers, like there are these numbers that we used to call, right, to ask what time it was.
Time and temperature.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so like you had 411.
Or the movie,
like my students.
Like to call the cinema to ask what was playing.
Yeah. So
both of those still operate in my hometown.
My students are doing this extra credit assignment where they're using Vote 411. And like it dawns on me that they don't understand what the 411 stands for in that. And like
having worked voter information tables at college campuses recently, when you tell them the name of that website, it does not click. They do not know what 411 is.
Like they don't understand that 411 is for like information. And so like that sort of thing, that like that's the kind of thing that you're looking at before you can just have like information readily available to you from this like sometimes overheating thing that's in your pocket. And so I'm just like, this is a moment in time that you see in this that like sometimes I have nostalgia for, because I'm just like, gosh. But then other times I'm like, man, sometimes I just really want to plug in my headphones and listen to music on this small box of a computer that lives in my pocket.
Or I want to
And
order food
so
without getting up from my couch.
yeah, or I want to see a variety of options and not have to have a drawer in my kitchen dedicated to Chinese takeout menus or pizza menus
Thank you.
or a variety. Now I can have a random crap drawer that has an abundance of random crap in it, not just takeout menus. So yeah, that's what I like about the
one has
first film.
the best reveal. Like it's
Yeah.
just
It
the
does.
most fun
It
of
does.
the reveals and the twists at the
It's a-
end. Like it's just the
It's
best
the most
last
rewatchable,
20 minutes.
right?
Yeah.
Like we can watch this film again, and
Yeah.
you're like, it's still an enjoyable thing. I think in a lot of ways.
Well, and
'cause
that's the thing with
it's-
any of the film with two
Yeah.
killers. You rewatch to be like, oh, which one is that one? Which one is doing this kill?
Right. Will Sydney ever be able to trust a man ever in her life? Because
Well,
they've
she
tried
does.
to
She
throw
marries
paramours at
the
her.
cop from the third film.
Yeah.
Which one is that one?
So that was the trilogy one. There's a cop in LA, right, when they're doing a movie within Scream about the original movie.
That's not
and
McDreamy, is it?
Yeah.
It is McDreamy. Yeah, she.
It is.
marries
She
him.
marries McDreamy. Okay, who is also in Sweet Home Alabama.
So much crossover.
Yeah, I don't
See?
think they actually say that, but there's in a later movie, I think Dewey's calling her to say it's happening again, and he asks about that character.
Yeah, because
so
she
it's
says
understood
something about
that that's her
kids.
husband.
Yeah, because she says I can't because like I have kids and whatever. Like she makes a whole point about her family.
And the best line
Okay.
of that movie, I'm Sidney effing Prescott. Of course I have a gun.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. I don't buy him as a cop. I'm just saying his hair's too good. Let's talk about Scream Queens.
He was supposed to be a Fed, right? He was an investigator.
Yeah,
that's different.
Something like that.
Okay,
He's not a real cop. He's a
I
fake
am
cop.
just not getting canceled over that. I'll have so many people who are like, no, goddamn, no. All right, I've got enough people who don't like me. We made these. Where does Nev Campbell rank in your mind's eye among Scream Queens? We mentioned Jamie Lee Curtis. We mentioned her mother. Who else is out there that are amongst these? We talked about. We can talk about the I still know what you did. I know what you did last summer. So it's Jennifer Love Hewitt, very much in that vein. Afterwards, where's Nev Campbell? Now that you can think about all these films,
I think she beats Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
there's a lot more fighting and a bit less running.
Yeah. I think especially when you're talking about people who are in a multitude, right? They are in a sequence of films. I think she, for me, would rank sort of just under. Why am I blanking on
Jamie Lee Curtis?
Jamie Lee Curtis. Yes, thank you. I could like see her in my eyes or in my brain because I just watched the newest Halloween film. But
she's still getting it done.
I know. Yeah. She's like out there. She's got that like thing in her kitchen,
Also,
her thing that just whoosh, swirls around. It's
please,
awesome.
Can I say this? Are we in the middle of a Jamie Lee Curtis thing? Because she's on The Bear now. She's won the Oscar recently.
I think she gets all her roses.
Good for her, because
I love her in everything.
The reason she was doing
stunning
horror films is that they were the only films she could get, and she was just happy to have a job. So
and she's great. She's in so much stuff. No,
yeah.
she's terrific.
I don't think I've seen a Jamie Lee Curtis film that was not good. Like I don't think there's a single role. Oh,
I have one. We've done it on this pod.
I loved Panic Room.
I love Panic Room.
We did Perfect with her and John Travolta.
I have never heard of that.
I've seen it.
Well, we actually did this on the pod with Natalia Petrozella, and it's all about this fitness craze going on in the early 1980s. You've seen the GIFs actually of her and John Travolta making sexy faces at each other while sweating to the oldies in some gym room. I'm telling you, this movie. But anyway, you've never seen it. It's not particularly
great. We'll have to watch this. Me next weekend.
No, you should.
I want to watch Ready or Not again. That was too good.
Rachel lives like 10 minutes from my house now, so we can just hang out.
And there's a wine bar in
All the
between.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know what's near Colorado? Nothing. So there's that.
I would say you just need to move to Texas, but you really, truly do not. Don't do that.
I think as much as I have bitched and moaned lately about Pueblo, and I feel like that's all I've done lately, I'm going to have to find something polite to say about Colorado eventually. I'm just looking
You
for
have great
that.
mountains.
That's what your
I
TikTok
would
should be. You should just
love.
read your restaurant reviews from Pueblo.
Yeah, that'd be very fun.
I'm afraid someone's going to kill me off of those things. Like,
No,
I'm
that's
just
fine.
enjoying myself, having myself a nice little day. Some of the people on Facebook were like, you don't have to be unnecessarily mean. And I'm like, kind of do. A little bit. So
But nothing says I can't be.
I deleted a review today of my doctor because I gave him a real bad review, and then they
That's how you end up
apologized.
dead.
So
Okay, they apologized. That's something.
That's fair.
yeah, exactly. All right, I want to ask you this: a final question. Scream. Is it a history movie?
It kind of has, I mean, it has all of those callbacks to so many different horror films, whether you have the guy dressed like Jason or the lines from different films. And, you know, there
The
is so
rules.
much horror film history, and it's clearly made both the script and the film by people who love those films. So I think it's in the way that some books are a love story to certain archives and certain, collections. It is that kind of thing, right? Where the film is a love story to those films.
I like to think of it more as a time capsule. I think it, like if you were to open that up and look at the various things that are in it, like you have a little bit of this film and you have a little bit of this film, you open up this part and there's like a little bit of prom night in there, right? Like you get the calls from prom night and you get some of the, I just watched that. I went on a Jamie Lee Curtis film spree.
Binge.
I was like, Rachel, you have to watch this.
Trading Places. Nicole, have you gone back and rewatched Trading Places yet?
No. I need to watch all the things. I am switching between 17 different streaming services to watch all these movies. It's exhausting. I have to look up which streaming service it's on so that I can watch all these things. It's exhausting. But I think it's more of a time capsule, right?
First world problems.
I know, right? I'm switching between your Amazon Prime and my Netflix because you're still logged in on my TV and our HBO Max. It's
you should mess up Rachel's algorithm.
I know.
On her.
I am so sorry. I am messing up your algorithm because I'm looking at yours, but it's all horror movies anyway, so you're fine. Yeah. Patrick made me get my own HBO Max profile, so I would stop watching horror movies on his algorithm.
I need to steal y'all's login.
Yeah, you should. But no, I think it's a time capsule, right? So you have a little bit of prom night here for the phone calls. You have a lot of there's a lot of things from the Bates Motel, right? Or the Bates Motel. There's a lot of stuff in there. You have some references to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You have just bits and pieces of things that you pull out here and there. There's a lot more of some things than others. But it's just a little bit of this here and there. And then you put them all back in. And then the next movie, sometimes you pull out another time capsule that has things from the first film. And then you have some things from other horror movies. And so I think that that's sort of the way that I look at it, is that it's more of a time capsule that you bury and then you pull back out, and you bury and you pull it back out for the next film. So, I mean, I think it is a history film inherently, because when you're looking at sort of the things within their context, this is inherently a 90s film with teen angst and all of the things. It's obviously not Clueless, but in its own way, you have a lot of the things with teen angst and relationships, and they're oh, school's out, and they're party, and so you have those things in and of themselves that make it sort of.
And I don't think Billy read as creepy in the 90s as he would today.
Yeah, well, and you have at some point the sheriff is talking about, right? So Dewey asks the sheriff if he thinks that Billy did it. And the sheriff is oh, if you had asked me that 20 years ago, I would say no, definitely. But kids these days are up to no good and stuff like that. And it's I mean, sure, but if you asked a sheriff that today, they would say literally the same thing about kids 20 years ago, which is like kids in the early 2000s or whatever. And so, which is like my generation of high school kids. And so they would be like, oh, if you had asked me 20 years ago, I'd say no. But kids these days, right? That's such a
Right.
normal thing to progress over time. But it feels like in the 90s, if they're talking about, I mean, in the 90s, 20 years ago would be the 70s. Like, do you honestly think that teens in the 70s were up to no problems? Like they were trouble free? Like, come on. And so, but like in the moment, that sounds like something appropriate for a cop in the 90s to say about these kids in wholesome, whatever neighborhood it is. So,
There's also the thing of like so many horror films try to do the whole based on a true story, and it is so thin to its actual connections to that event.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
And Scream doesn't try that, even though it was inspired by real killings. So I think it's an interesting choice that they like don't even try to make that connection because it is so divorced. Like it's inspired by, but it's not really based on those events.
Right.
But there's definitely movies that claim to be based on real events that are far more loosely connected to reality.
I don't know, Rachel, I'm pretty sure I've told you this story, but Jason, I'm sure you probably don't know. When I was in China years ago, in like 2015, I was there with a group from my church at that time, and we met with some students that were college students. And there, everything obviously that you search on the internet is like filtered, right? So everything about Texas, everything about the US, everything about any government website is taken out. And so we told these students, they asked us, oh, like, where in the US are you from? And we said, oh, we're from Texas. And so that night, we were going to meet with them the next day. That night, they went home and like looked up stuff about Texas. And the next day, when I met with them, they looked so concerned. And they were like, were you there? Are you okay? Were you there? And I was like, for what? I'm thinking like, what could possibly have popped, like the Alamo? Like what could possibly have popped up? The first thing that popped up on their thing was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so they were like, for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I was like, oh, no, sweetie, no. And so then I had to like explain to them that like, that is not a real thing. Like, it's not a real,
it happened.
It's not a real thing. And like, also no. But I was like, thank you for your concern, because they were so genuinely worried. And I was like, no. But like, that was just like, no. I was not there for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but thank you for your concern.
All right, one final question. You can hold any movie for a year before we do another horror film in October. What am I holding? What's next in your pocket? We've done Carrie.
We've done Carrie. We've done Scream. We could do Fear Street because we would make you suffer through 3 separate films because it is a trilogy.
No. I really want to do The Others.
The fuck is The Others?
It's more ghost horror film and mystery.
Okay.
It's got a good plot twist.
The Others.
My favorite one recently is Ready or Not.
Yeah, Ready or Not is good.
Where the family tries to hunt her on her wedding night.
Yeah, Rachel and I watched that one twice.
Even SNEH got in on that one, and that's not his normal genre.
Yeah, it's not so much horror as it is like thriller.
Okay.
It's a little bit of both, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little of both.
And of course, my favorite ever is Happy Death Day.
Yeah.
What about that new James McAvoy film that just came out? Have you seen
that? I love him in everything. Yeah. I will talk about that man for days.
The original was creepy.
And that trailer would come on. Yeah, the trailer would come on, and I would get squeamish just watching the trailer because he's Professor X, and he's such a terrific weirdo.
Yeah, I love that man and everything.
He's one of those guys. I don't tend to think about him as like in my pantheon of actors. I tend to whatever, but then every time he's on screen, you go, Jesus, you're just getting a performance out of this guy. Like he doesn't slow down.
Yeah,
and dude's cut to stone in that film. Like, and it just makes me with the looks he would get through. Like, I know I'm gonna have to watch a movie eventually, so we could always do the original too. So we could do them both.
You know, Rachel and I are always down to watch multiple movies.
Apparently, you watched 6 of them tonight, and I just barely made it through one, so that's good. All right. Speaking of barely making it through, I got to eat dinner. So, Rachel Gunter, Nicole Donawho, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Great time.
And giving us an excuse to rewatch all of these films that we love together.
You did not need an excuse. You were just going to do it anyway.
We'll probably.
That's kind of what our husbands told us. We're like, no, we're doing this for HATM. Like, we have to watch these movies.
This is research.
It's our homework. Jason gave us homework.
I have a thought. I'm going to get both of your husbands on the pod sometime and just have them on this podcast without you guys. It'll just.
I mean,
I'm going to
Nicole's
start getting the spouses of our
used
guests.
to be his history film fan, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
When he first got out, blocked him. The first time
that was me. That was my bad.
Twitter,
that was my bad.
I blocked him immediately, and you're like, "Don't do that."
I was like, "Oh my god, that's my bad." I can see how that was a problem. Didn't think that one through.
I'm so fast with the block button. If it's a handle that looks weird or there's no image, you're done.
Yeah.
There's numbers and all I see are retweets.
Yep.
Done.
Yeah.
Well, and SNEH isn't even on Twitter. He's just become our background character for the years.
I know. We'll
from another horror movie, right? Film. From The Witch. That's where he got his nickname.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, that fucking movie terrifies me that way. Mm-hmm. So that one.
If you liked The Witch, you should watch Fear Street because that third film is set in that vein.
All right. Fear.
He's like, I'm not doing it, but okay.
He's like, I'm fake writing this.
I wrote it. I actually wrote its words over here. So there. So, all right.
Plus, there's books in Fear Street. We could read books.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Stop giving him more to do, Rachel.
God knows I'm not busy enough. Between this, the new podcast that we're going to launch here in the next couple of weeks, which I'll tell you about off the air. Yeah, we're busy.